Hey, Matthew.
Hey, how you doing, Mark?
Hey, so this is Mark Goldberg with the Global Affairs blog UN Dispatch.
And this is Matthew Lee with Inner City Press, inside the United Nations.
So Matthew, we actually taped this chat about 3 or 4 days ago. However, I was in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and you were at the UN.
I know.
And we had a wonderful discussion about my trip in Addis and my trip to Ethiopia.
Yep.
However, it was lost. The technology gods did not shine down and smile upon us, unfortunately.
And it can't be reproduced. You can't step in the same river twice.
But,
so we just have
for
to
those who are there,
sure.
Let me tell you, it was a great devlog.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's the lost classic. It's going to be like one of those, there's a bootleg version out there somewhere.
There you go, somewhere floating in cyberspace.
Mark
Unfortunately, only us and the sort of Ethiopian
secret police, I'm
media
sure,
monitors and spies were there to listen in on us. So I'm back here in Washington D.C. I arrived yesterday, still a little jet lagged. We're taping this on Tuesday, by the way, Tuesday before the Thanksgiving holiday. And big sort of news for me here in Washington of the week is the news that Susan Rice is likely to be the next United States permanent ambassador to the United Nations. How has that news been received, if at all?
I'll be honest. It's interesting. I'm not sure if people really take it as gospel yet. You know, although so far all the other ones, his Treasury pick, and it's like the Hillary Clinton one. Do you take that to be 100%?
I do. At this point, I do. Yeah. I mean, it's all over. No one's denying it, and the fact that both camps are very professional in how they handle media and the rollout of these kind of things.
So what does Samantha Power get?
I have to think so. What do you say about Samantha Power?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess there's some other post.
I have
I don't think she'll be in the State Department.
Power. I don't know if maybe she's sort of necessarily a government servant type.
Right.
I've immense respect for her. But back to Susan Rice.
Sure.
I have to say that I am sort of really, really pleased with this pick. Two reasons. First of all, Susan Rice is known to be very close to Obama, probably one of his trusted foreign policy advisors, and the fact that he's going to put someone so close to him at the UN, to me, sort of signals the importance to which he attaches, or he will attach, diplomacy at the UN. And it's also pretty clear that Susan Rice will have a direct line to the White House, which is probably pretty important. And when you're in sort of these kind of Security Council deliberations, and it's important to know that your sort of negotiating adversary knows that you have a direct line to the president.
Although sometimes that can make some problem with your intermediate supervisor, in this case, Miss Hillary Clinton, right?
Well, I don't want to create any controversies where none exist so far. But I'll also
I think we're safe. I think we're safe so far.
Yeah, I think we're pretty safe. And I'll also say the second reason I'm really, as I think Mother Jones wrote it, I'm jazzed up about this, is also that Susan Rice's background is that in sort of non-traditional foreign policy threats, but also she's a regional Africa expert, right? She was a assistant secretary of state in the Clinton administration, and for African affairs. And as you know, about 70% of all you guys talk about at the UN is has to do with an issue, a situation in Africa, and I feel like she'll focus.
Yeah.
Well, and also, and so she'll bring a certain amount of expertise to those issues.
Sure.
Additionally, she's been she's paid a lot of attention to Darfur for a long time, and she's made some statements that I would agree with, sort of describing the current administration's policy as something of bluster and retreat, which I think was a skillful way of encapsulating sort of the last 6 years of policy towards Darfur, 5 years of policy towards Darfur, and I feel like she'll focus like a laser beam on that. So I'm optimistic, pleased, all of the above. And
you sound very jazzed up. I don't want to say that you've gotten the talking points, but I couldn't. You sound very positive. I guess I'd just say I'm agnostic until she arrives here. But I mean, I've definitely seen her speak on issues, and what I think is I think she obviously has has, well, I mean, Jendai Fraser, I don't know what you think of her, but she's considered an Africa expert. So just being an Africa expert doesn't
sure.
That and a token, gets you on the subway. But what I'm interested with is there's this idea that under Obama, it's going to be like plays well with others. You know what I mean? A whole different approach and multilateralism. And from what I've seen of Ms. Rice so far, I mean, she's she should be opinionated. It's good to have an opinion.
Sure,
but I can certainly imagine maybe even greater standoffs between her and, let's say, Sudanese representatives or representatives even of the African Union taking Sudan's side than has been the case with Khalilzad. Khalilzad sort of just I don't want to say he floats through. He's a very affable person. I mean, just today, the president of the General Assembly, Nicaraguan priest Miguel Descoto, was praising Khalilzad while trashing Bush. So I think it's just interesting. I mean, I just sort of wonder. There seem to be these. It'll be interesting to see whether this anticipation that day one of the Obama administration, it'll be all kind of not kumbaya, but like working well together. Whether that actually takes place,
Right. Well, from what I've seen her and from what I read about her, she does have kind of sharp elbows.
Sure.
Which is
I've heard you jazzed about that too. You like that, but I mean, let's see.
Which is and again, when she's in these kind of negotiations, talking to say the Sudanese representative or to whomever might be considered an adversary at the moment, I think it's useful for that
would be called
negotiating
the African Union.
Not adversary, her negotiating adversaries to know that she has sort of the ear and the confidence of the president in a major way, and I think this is really exciting and really useful. Although there are some in sort of progressive foreign policy community who are somewhat. I wouldn't say, they want to see her at the NSC where she'd be making policy as opposed to implementing policy. Right. That said, I really am pleased to see her on the weeds, in the weeds on issues like Congo and Darfur.
It's strange to be in this position, but I can't resist saying this to you, which is that it seems like you may have a selective approach towards sharp elbows. For example, John Bolton had some of the sharpest elbows I've seen since I've been here, but you didn't like that. But it seems like it's not the sharpness of the elbow.
Let me say
maybe you just like the policy.
Is all he had.
Okay.
Was sharp elbows.
No, you just disagree with his positions.
No, the thing is, like, when it came down to it, there are a lot of the positions about Bolton, say on management reform. Substantively, I agreed with very much. It was the way in which he went about achieving those policy objectives, his sharp elbows.
All I'm saying
that made sort of outcomes, UN reform. Stricter management oversight, less likely, because all he did was use those sharp elbows to alienate our allies rather than isolating our adversaries.
Just to be a devil's advocate, since Khalilzad's been here, what exactly, for example, the Zimbabwe sanctions resolution drew 2 double vetoes. The U.S. has a number of management reforms things, none of which have been passed. Again, I'm not saying, I really am saying it's sort of like, I think it will be interesting. If she's here and we're both still doing this, it will be interesting when the sharp elbows are exhibited, if you find yourself willing to say, wow, the U.S. is being arrogant again, or those are pretty sharp elbows. That's not getting the job done. Because I'm sure I think there's going to be not even a day of reckoning. I just think that there's an abiding, despite the sort of euphoria of Obama at the top of a ticket. You know what I mean? The many of the U.S. positions are not going to be that different, right? And I'm not sure you're going to see the world like embracing, shooting bombs into Pakistan or whatever else happens,
Right. And this, and I don't want to get too off track, but I'd been thinking about this for a little bit about sort of, we're going to see, I think, in the next, say, year or so, what sort of were our sort of Obama's interests, what are sort of American interests, sort of regardless of who is at the top of the administration. So what are just sort of core American positions, core American interests that won't change regardless of who is the president. And one thing I look forward to in particularly seeing is how the United States approaches the climate change negotiations that are going to take place in Copenhagen in late 2009.
Don't jump over Poznan. Poznan is all the talk here.
Right. And these negotiations to replace the Kyoto Treaty, which is set to expire in 2012. I'm curious to see in these. I think this is going to be the first big sort of test for Obama, but also for the rest of the world to see, how close. Obama is clearly more productive on climate change issues than President Bush.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering just how far out on a limb Obama is willing to go on these climate change negotiations. Is he going to be able to go so far as to embrace, say, the European position?
Which is changing by the day, by the way. Have you seen Germany?
Which is changing by the day. Or is it going to be something of sort of its own sort of standalone position? And the danger of being a standalone position is that it makes it a little bit harder to convince, say, the Chinese and the Indians to go along with sort of a big climate change treaty that is forceful.
I'll just before we turn back to
I am diverted.
No, not at all. Since you set the percentage at 70% Africa, I want to make sure we get back to it. But I have to. Okay. I'm compelled to say this. That just as one of the field that I'm either more immersed in or more than the UN is the field of fair banking, predatory lending, and consumer protection. And I do want to say the number one, the Team Obama's embrace of the bailout of Citigroup was either surprising or I guess not surprising. There doesn't seem to be any daylight in the sense of the nomination of a guy like Timothy Geithner, who was the head of the New York Fed and oversaw all these bailouts. I have to say that on this ground alone, it's looking like less change. And I've heard somebody say, like, from the left wing of the Democratic Party, he's going to be subject to criticism. But these guys are no different. Larry Summers, who are they? You know what I mean? So I don't know. I mean, I'm only saying this as
the author of Predatory Lender.
Sure, predatory bender, but not just that. I'm just saying in this field, it's surprising that I mean I guess the idea is to sort of have placate the markets to choose somebody that they know. But I mean, just as the analysis is that this guy Geithner was a protege of Robert Rubin, who in fact was the chairman, the head of the office of the chairman at Citigroup when it ran into $70 billion in losses and ran up all these losses. So it just seems, not to take pot shots, it's pretty surprising. And so from this is why I'm actually inferring, jumping over to the UN field, that things may not be as different as you think. I mean, it's a very inspiring story, and I'm inspired, and I'm certainly hopeful. But if the economy, which everyone is saying is issue number one, is any guide, it's not. I don't know. These are the same recycled people. And it's not even that they're recycled from the Clinton administration different than the Bush administration. They're on board for the bailout of Citigroup. They've nominated people that have worked in with the current team and whatever. We could talk about that more. But I think if what he's done in finance is carried over to foreign policy, not going to see much change. You're going to have the same criticisms that you have now. But we'll see. I'm stand to be corrected.
I mean, I'm out of my element talking about sort of finance policy with you.
Sure. Come on. Jump on in. No, but let's. Okay, but here I will say that while you're away, as you know, it's sort of the biggest kind of ongoing story here on which we have not just briefings, but like I guess the UN is being put to the test in the Congo. Its largest peacekeeping mission. Everything's being deployed. They've since we last spoke, a resolution was passed allowing for some 3,000 more troops. The Ban Ki-moon has recruited his own personal envoy to try to bring peace to Eastern Congo, who's President Obasanjo, former president of Nigeria. He was here yesterday speaking about.
So when I was when I was in Addis, I had sort of a small press gaggle. With an informal press conference with Jean Ping, the head of the African Union, and we were asking him about Congo, and he made the point that what really needs to be done is we need a new UN Security Council resolution to increase the size of MONUC and strengthen its mandate. And sort of as he was saying that, sort of a local reporter reached into his pocket and pulled out a cell phone and showed Jean Ping. Sort of a Reuters headline saying that, in fact, as Jean Ping was saying, that the Security Council indeed voted on an increase of troops to Monuc and an expansion of the mandate. But I wonder. So yeah, they voted on this, but it's going to be a long time until these troops actually get deployed, right? Just because the security and this, something viewers and people that talk and think about the UN should understand that just because the Security Council approves the authorization of troops somewhere does not necessarily mean that troops are going to head there anytime soon. It takes a while for troops to be generated. There's not some reserve. There's not some excess pool of UN peacekeepers waiting to be deployed at a moment's notice. The troop contributing countries, members of the UN, need to pony up these troops, and who knows?
I feel that they spoke, for example, with India before passing this. India already has the biggest contingent in North Kivu, and so the idea is, I'm not saying it's going to happen that fast. What I want to engage with you on is this idea of expanding the mandate. It seems more and more clear that one of the problems with the mandate is this idea that the main function of the UN in the Congo is to now be in support of the government of Joseph Kabila and of the Congolese army. The most recent incident took place, I guess you could say yesterday or Sunday, depending on the time zone, in which the Monuc peacekeepers were escorting 23 people. 10 were Mai rebels, 10 were policemen, and 3 civilians back to Goma. And the Congolese army, with whom they work, stopped the truck, made everyone get out and put their hands up, and took all 23 people away. And this is took place.
It's clearly. I mean, that is clearly problematic. It's
pretty problematic.
The strategy. Well, no, I'm saying the larger point you're making about sort of the UN peacekeepers supporting, acting sort of in support with, in concert with the Congolese National Army against a adversary, the army of Nkunda. I mean, that's a problem. Now, the sort of the origins of that policy were that initially sort of this Goma peace accord that was signed in January last year, the government signed it, a bunch of the rebels signed it, Nkunda signed it initially, but as soon as he signed it, violated it. And so the sort of peacekeeping mission there was seen as being sort of something that is supporting this peace agreement. And that meant that they were enforcing the peace agreement. And so, too, also enforcing this peace agreement was the Congolese National Army. Now, you say that's a problem. I also
when
think
the peacekeepers get held up at gunpoint by the Congolese National Army, there's a problem.
That's the way it was, and I think that needs to change as well.
Well, that did, exactly. I mean, it's a major. But here's the other thing. So Mr. Obasanjo is here, and it was pretty interesting. It's not for me. I guess we're in an opinion world, so I'll give this opinion. I think that he is pretty courageous in that right now the president of the Congo, Joseph Kabila, is saying he will not speak with Nkunda, that there's a peace process. There's no reason to give Laurent Nkunda any more props or face time than any other rebel that signed that agreement. It seems kind of ludicrous because the world as a whole has been watching Nkunda almost take over Goma. There's a lot of, so it seems usually the idea of talking to your adversary is something that we try to encourage, right? That's one of the, right? That's So Obasanjo, to his credit, I guess giving an opinion on that one, is willing to say they should talk. The thing that he didn't that emerged was the following, and I wonder what you think of it. I mean, one of the cynical view of the Nkunda rebellion, or maybe even cynical, maybe just realistic or realpolitik, is that it really has to do with resources, and not just. I mean, everyone talks about coltan and other minerals, but the government of Joseph Kabila signed a $9 billion resource deal with the Chinese government recently, this year, $9 billion. And there's you have human rights groups sort of questioning China, buying resources in the Congo. But you also have a lot of people in the Congo saying there was no oversight. It was that's a huge deal. And certainly Nkunda, and I guess to the degree you can say minority groups or people that weren't fully brought in by the election feel that this is just a money grab by Joseph Kabila. So Nkunda has begun to talk about this deal and either undoing the deal or sharing the wealth. And so here's the irony. So I asked Mr. Obasanjo, he was at the stakeout, and I said, what about this deal? He said, yes, and Nkunda raised it, and he went to Kabila and asked about the deal, but Kabila assured him that the deal was done correctly and there's nothing more to be said about it. Meanwhile, Obasanjo himself is currently, even as an ex-president, wildly under fire in Nigeria for having struck his own $8 billion deal with China to build a railroad in Nigeria before he went out of power. So the question, I guess, becomes, or not even a question, it's not just, it's ironic, it's funny, but it seems like Mr. Obasanjo may have kind of a conflict as a mediator, right? It seems like one of the issues between Nkrumah and Kabila has to do with the legitimacy of a kind of unilateral presidential deal with China for resources, and that's exactly what he's being accused of having done in Nigeria, and the deal is, it looks like, being undone. So I always wonder with the UN, I understand the UN, there's not an unlimited pool of high-profile personalities willing to mediate, but I do wonder what kind of vetting goes into it, or what. Maybe they said, okay, this could be a problem, but Mr. Obasanjo, do you commit to not carry over, your views on these Chinese deals to this next one? What do you think, Mark?
Well, I mean, I think you need to sort of set some context here.
Okay.
So Obasanjo is the president of Nigeria, is one of at his peak one of the more powerful and democratically elected leaders of Africa. Was principally responsible for the creation of the African Union as well. Mm-hmm. He's a guy who carries.
So
a lot of weight.
You're vouching for him. You're despite.
Well, I'm just saying, like it's not like he's just some
No, I know.
A lot of times these many African leaders are sort of just seen as sort of being tin pot dictator types.
Sure.
But he's certainly not. And he it was a contested election, right? But he left. He's no longer in power, and it's so listen, I know nothing of both of the deals to which you refer,
mm-hmm.
and the way you set it up makes it sound sinister.
It's
but like I said, you have to look at sort of who Obasanjo is, and
sure.
he is he is sort of a regional leader and not just some like tin pot dictator. He's been elected. And also,
So can we expect in a year or two Joseph Kabila to be mediating in Kenya or Zimbabwe? He was elected.
What I care about most is results.
Sure.
I don't care about these like appearances of impropriety. I don't even think it is impropriety.
Okay.
These like appearances you say of impropriety that somehow because Obasanjo as president of Nigeria struck a deal with the Chinese and Kabila, as president of Congo, struck a deal with the Chinese.
Do a little Googling, Mark, and you'll see he didn't just strike a deal. The deal is one of the major issues right now in Nigeria.
I'm just saying, sure. I'm just saying that if striking a deal with the Chinese mm-hmm. disqualifies you from doing this and that in Africa, mm-hmm. Then sort of no one is going to be able to do anything because the Chinese are striking deals all over the place.
Okay. I asked you an answer.
In Addis, you couldn't see, you couldn't throw a stone without seeing a Chinese reconstruction project in a Chinese construction project in Addis Ababa. Mm-hmm. But I mean, look, what about the Congo and MONUC? What at least to me seems to be the most urgent thing is that sort of security in Eastern Congo mm-hmm. be bolstered, and I think it's critical that the international community step up and contribute troops to that mm-hmm. security. I think it's going to be a while. I think it's going to take too long for those extra peacekeepers to be generated. And as you know, I've been sort of advocating a sort of Security Council sanctioned sort of multinational force, something mm-hmm. like what happened in Nigeria, in Eastern Congo. Mm-hmm. In 2005 in Bunia.
Mm-hmm.
With
do you think France?
When French peacekeepers sort of in a similar situation were able to secure a town and restore order, at least temporarily. Mm-hmm. So that I think is most critical.
Do you think that should France send troops?
Well, they can't. Because they are, I think, so detested by one party to the conflict. That's Rwanda. So
but I thought you cared about results and not the appearance of conflict.
Can't and shouldn't.
Okay. All right.
It would probably be too inflammatory. Right. So the backstory, we've talked about this before, right?
Yep.
But the backstory is that Rwanda and France are sort of adversaries at the moment, and Rwanda is. thought to be known to be backing the rebel army of Nkunda. So that's like that's a sticking point. So maybe not French.
Well, France is accused by Kagame.
I don't need to be contradicting myself here, but
sure.
there aren't like a surplus of troops even in Europe. They're being deployed to Afghanistan at the moment. So it's a pretty terrible situation all around.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I think that the lack of international, the lack of the international community is clearly sort of lacks a will to do much to put their money where their mouth is in Eastern Congo.
I say again, and it's probably taking sides, but I think the UN has the most leverage with Kabila, not Rwanda or Nkunda, and they should use that to get the two parties talking and make some, whatever it is. That's what. Yeah. If you care about results, then what it's about here is cutting a deal, and Nkunda will be getting something, and that's how it goes.
I agree with that.
Right.
So maybe we can move on and talk about piracy.
Let's talk pirates. Totally.
In Addis last week, it was sort of all pirates all the time. That they're like on all their English language news channels that I was watching. It was quite literally. Not maybe 20 hours out of 24 hours of news was about Somali pirates. From Al Jazeera English to Sky News to CNN International, all of them, all pirates.
Sure. No, it's been pretty pirated up over here too.
Yeah. So what is the Security Council doing about this?
They've been fulminating. They have yet to they already gave an authorization for countries to shoot first and ask questions later. And under that authorization, the Indians recently definitely sunk something. Now they've claimed that they sunk the pirate mothership. It's not clear that took place because some boats have been taken since. And I think one of the problems with not a problem. It's not to be this may end up coming off as sort of pro-pirate. But it's fine to give an authorization, but the question becomes who decides? I mean, I guess it's obvious. I guess we just are going to assume that if you sink a boat, it must have been pirates. But there actually one issue that arose here is that there have actually been some pirates that have been caught and they've had to be released. The German foreign defense minister was here and, under questioning, acknowledged that they didn't feel comfortable with their legal authority to hold pirates, and so therefore there was a certain amount of catch and release going on. The Brits too. The Brits have caught them and given it over to Kenya. I think the next step is kind of actually legally to come up with a way under which there's not this legal problem. I think what a lot of people may not think there's this. I think that you can think that Somali pirates, this must mean that the Islamists of Somalia are getting money to do terrible things by capturing boats. As it turns out, actually, the Islamists, or the Al-Shabaab, and the ones that are fighting the transitional federal government, they're actually quite anti-pirate. In fact, maybe they're just trying to shake down the pirates. But the idea is that they actually came out with a statement against the pirates taking this Saudi oil tanker.
Yeah.
They said, how could you take a boat of a fellow Islamic country, and they've kind of ordered them to give it back, and they've headed with their rocket-propelled grenade launchers and technicals to these towns in Puntland to try to intercept the pirates. So in a way, the world is in this weird position. I mean, I've seen people try to say, well, okay, we acknowledge that the pirates aren't the Islamists, but it's so murky in Somalia. This money must be going to fund terrorism and insurgency. Ironically, the only people that are actually fighting the pirates at present are the Islamists.
Yeah.
So it's you're in this. It's sort of trite to say it, but the question becomes, what's more important to the world community? This idea of cracking down the pirates, in which case you might actually even want to work with. Maybe the Security Council should provide an authorization for the Islamists to fight pirates, because they're actually doing it.
Yeah.
Or in an alternative, if you really want to fight the Islamists, so it goes. It's kind of a strange irony,
Well, I guess what's sort of disappointing for me to see is that I'm pleased, that Somalia is in the news, but when we're talking about pirates, I don't see a lot of commentaries and commentator sort of making the leap between fighting piracy and stabilizing Somalia.
Right.
It seems to be that they're talking about the piracy as just sort of this thing that exists, and it only exists because Somalia is sort of a lawless place, and I'm wondering sort of at the Security Council, at the UN, are people looking at this holistically,
well,
or are they simply talking about ways in which to react? And
I think there's two ways to look on it. Yeah. I will say this: the South African ambassador Kamalo, who's almost off the council, by the way, both his country and he himself, by December 31st, they're setting sail. So it's he's been one of the more articulate non-permanent members. Yeah, they're setting sail into the teeth of pirates.
Yes.
He made a big point of saying that it's a shame that these Western countries only wake up and pay attention when their boats are being taken, and that is to be said. The one thing is that I've seen it here since the idea of stabilizing Somalia. I think that the world certainly the U.S. we know that even if before the U.S. and the Security Council gave the green light to Ethiopia to basically invade Somalia to try to dislodge the Islamic courts in 2006, the idea the world community has, in the name of trying to stabilize Somalia, has sided with a pretty unpopular government that seems like not just with the Shabab, but it's sort of, if you really wanted to bring stability to Somalia, you really might have to step back and say, maybe these Islamists have a place at the table. Actually, they're not unpopular.
There's a lot of agreement between us today, but I completely agree. Agree with that, and it seems quite counterproductive.
Do you think Susan Rice is going to?
Well, like you said, it comes down to Ethiopia, right? Which is sort of the seen by the current administration and by previous administrations as well as being sort of a key American ally in the region, and the current administration sort of allied with it sort of very closely as sort of because they saw sort of the Ethiopian army in Somalia as being a bulwark against terrorism in the Horn of Africa, and they sort of, I think, prioritized this sort of perceived counter-terrorism need over a more sort of, I think, productive and constructive approach to reconciliation and peace in Somalia.
But do you think under Barack Obama, and let's say you're saying it's going to be Susan Rice, do you think they're going to take the position that Al-Shabaab needs a place at the table, or will they, in fact, realizing that the American people only have so much time to think about Somalia, be running very afraid of being portrayed as somehow changing U.S. foreign policy in a pro-Islamic insurgent way, that they'll just stay with the same policy?
I'm
betting on the latter.
I have the sort of impression that there is this very pragmatic streak to sort of Obama's foreign policy thinking, and in sort of very non-ideological way, and sort of which is something very different from what we've been used to for the last 8 years, and so I have the impression that in fact we will be negotiating with, or at least the United States. I don't know. With at least the Islamic courts. Who knows? I think the point is that there is, I think, a sense that all other options have failed so far.
That's true.
And like I said, I do think that the incoming administration is sort of pragmatic above all else. I don't. It's not looking to me like they're being driven by the same sort of ideological commitment to a sort of a war on terror in the Horn of Africa, whether that's real or perceived. And I don't know if that draws them to supporting Ethiopia in particular as wholeheartedly as the current administration is. Now that said, walking and changing subjects a little bit, walking around the streets of Addis, to say that Obama is admired there is an understatement. Outside the listen to this, outside the UNICEF headquarters, like a street vendor kid tried to hawk me a bootleg copy of Obama's speech to the Democratic National Committee. Like that's how obsessed people are with Obama in Africa. I even bought myself a copy of an Amharic, the Ethiopian language version of Dreams of My Father, and sort of the publisher took some liberties. Yeah, right. We talked about this in our lost
lost sessions.
But I thought it was really funny that the publisher took some liberties with the title and changed Dreams of My Father from sort of secrets to greatness and change. which I think is sort of a funny way, but I think illustrative of how many Africans view Obama. And you know, I think that raises maybe a big question, right? What does it mean that the most popular political leader in Africa is the president of the United States?
No, it is. It's almost surreal, you know.
Mm-hmm. And what does that mean in particular to sort of pseudo-democratic leaders, or not very pseudo-democratic leaders, like the prime minister of Ethiopia, Meles Zenawi? Now that I'm sort of safe in D.C., I can say, you know, I can say it, but you know, I have to think that they have to be sort of quaking a little bit that this sort of foreign influence is such a strong is so popular.
I'm sure the Ogaden National Liberation Front, I'm sure, has written to, if not Barack himself, to Miss Rice to get their views.
Well, you joke, but incidentally, I was talking to some sort of local folk, and they were saying how a lot of the opposition movement is like sort of pretending to be endorsed by Barack Obama, as you know, a way to increase their popularity.
Sure.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's sort of, I think will be pretty interesting to see. And to watch coming forward.
No, here's the one. But this is one thing that's kind of inconsistent. I was working on a story today about Afghanistan, because there's this obviously the council is actually on a trip there. But meanwhile there's this kind of rift between the UN mission there. Kai Ida is the special representative of the UN in Afghanistan, and the defense minister of Australia, who said, you know, we offered a one-star general and they turned us down. It's kind of like the way it turns out is that there's a certain number of countries, the ones particularly that are dealing with the south of Afghanistan, that want to take, you know, they're the ones like fighting there. You know, they suffer casualties. They sort of feel that they've expressed frustration with the UN mission not more quickly either, you know, deploying, okay, it's very unsafe, or even accepting sort of the assets that they're offering them, like generals that would be paid by Australia, not by the UN, to do work there. But what emerged as I nosed around in this is actually that despite like Obama was on record saying, you know, a surge in Afghanistan, that among the kind of, you know, certainly the Afghan mission here and the like-minded people, they were surprised to not. They found it very hard to like talk to Barack Obama, get a hearing from him, and this has led to some kind of like acting up over there, such as the offer to meet with Mullah Omar with no preconceptions, stuff like this. There seems, I mean, I'm sure you've seen today's story too, where Afghanistan said the West has to, you know, set a timeline for leaving, or Karzai threatens to, you know, he's going to negotiate with the Taliban, you know. And it's sort of, it's getting a little jumpy. I mean, it's sort of interesting because this was where he was distinguishing himself from Bush, saying, I'm out of Iraq, I'm going to go into Afghanistan. You'd think that like Karzai would like that, but for some reason there wasn't. It's actually a joke that I heard today is like, it seems like the strategy is to like, they'll definitely talk to like the enemies but not their allies. Like, I don't know if they're talking to the enemies either, but the idea of like a willingness to, you know, to finally have a dialogue with whether it's Hugo Chavez and Ahmadinejad, but like this was Karzai, and he seems to, I don't know, I actually really ideologically I don't understand it. Maybe it's a scheduling issue. Maybe it's, who knows what it is. Any views?
Ideologically, see again, I think that this is a very non-ideological administration. You know, I think, like I said, I think we're going to be shocked because we're so used to foreign policy being driven by ideology these last 8 years that sort of when the new administration's foreign policy doesn't fit neatly into our boxes, that we're going to be shocked and confused, and enemy will set in, and we won't know what to do with ourselves. But I think this is all because. Like I said, pragmatism is going to be more sort of.
Well, it's going to be.
It's going to be the way in which I think that the new administration defines itself. So I
want to ask you about some. I always hold off on sort of UN nitty gritty, but I want to ask your view on this. There was, I guess, let me just try to think when this was. Quite recently, Ban Ki-moon went to Geneva, and there was this new Human Rights Hall, which has a very intricately painted, in a stalactite fashion, sort of paint-dripping, $25 million ceiling, which the Spanish government offered to pay for to the UN. the controversy began in Spain, but has since spread because they spent part of their development aid budget on the ceiling. So, whatever. It seemed like a no-brainer to ask, in this time of global financial crisis, is the UN comfortable with the use of international cooperation and development aid budgets for this ceiling? And first they tried to say, well, it's since it's not UN money, they don't have to respond. But they did take the money. So then they said, it's all private foundation money. But that wasn't true. The Spanish government came out and said the dates on which it was all approved by the government. It may seem kind of mean-spirited, and I know that there's certainly a place for art in all things. But what's your view, Mark?
Guernica.
Yeah.
Guernica, the great Picasso piece, is
Definitely.
right outside the Security Council, and that is sort of like an enduring symbol.
It is.
Of
Have
the
you seen the
Security
ceiling?
Council and the devs. No, I haven't seen the ceiling.
All right.
So there is a place for art in international relations.
I think that one of the issues that people raise is like there have been a number of speeches here about how with the global financial crisis, developed countries shouldn't cut back their budgets. Already at least 2 countries have said, Iceland has definitely said, like, the commitments they made when they were trying to run for the Security Council probably are not going to be met.
That's funny.
That is funny. And Italy too. Italy was named by there's an agency. There's UNRWA, which is the UN Relief and Works Administration, which actually does very concrete work in the occupied Palestinian territories of running schools and stuff. They came and said that their budget is down, and upon questioning, were willing to name Italy as a country that said they're cutting back.
Really?
Yeah, totally.
So this is it. I mean, this is what this is maybe the first thing to go are contributions to international organizations.
Mm-hmm.
That's not surprising, but it's worrisome nonetheless.
But it seems like for that reason, the UN. I mean, eventually, after like a lot of back and forth and them getting very kind of testy about it. I mean, I guess I look on it this way. They should have just said.
Just to follow this thread,
please.
So I'm sure you saw news that sort of this meeting in Doha, which is not the Doha round, but is a development meeting that happens to be taking place in Doha, Qatar, is not. It was like a big sort of aid development meeting. Let's talk about ways in which we can increase
financing for development,
investment in finance, and financing for development.
What they call it?
Great, right. And it turns out that neither the head of the World Bank nor the head of the International Monetary Fund will attend in person. They're both sending deputies to the disappointment and chagrin of many people who, not only in the developing world, but who care about financing for development. So
I asked
this I think is indicative of what we are in store for.
I was actually going to ask you, whether you thought Zelig, because I was sort of he's always here at the UN talking about Africa and sort of is palling around with Ban Ki-moon. It's kind of surprising that they didn't put the squeeze on him to go. But I did ask the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Father Miguel Discoto Brockman. I asked him today whether he thought this was a snub, and he said absolutely, and then immediately went into a riff about when Bush was most recently here. There was this Culture of Peace meeting sponsored by the Saudi royal family. Basically, it was kind of like religion on parade in the UN. But Bush did come for that, but according to Discoto, Bush refused to kind of acknowledge Mr. Discoto and didn't give him his props. So he said, He said that's just as typical that they hate multilateralism, and people had advised him, Discoto, to sort of either not say any positive words or to walk out of the chamber, but he didn't. I mean, it would not.
Well, it's not only Zelig, but it's also the French head of the International Monetary Fund is also not going, and no one can accuse the French of not loving their multilateralism.
I know they're sending. I believe Sarkozy's going to old Doha.
Yes. So it's like I said, it's a pretty, I think it's indicative of what's to come and a pretty disturbing trend and certainly worrisome if we want to make sort of headway on sort of these major development issues going forward. So
the road to Doha.
We're at our mark.
Okay.
Thanks.
We're at our
Matthew.
Mark. We can. To be continued.
Have a happy holiday, Matthew.
Sure, you too. Definitely. Welcome back.
Thank you. Let's
okay.
see ya.